Welcome to Walking the Haftarah. I'm Tyler Merwin, and this is Torah Portion YITRO. This week's Torah portion is Exodus 18:1 through 20:26. The Haftarah this week is Isaiah 6:1 through 7:6 and 9:5 and 6. YITRO means Jethro, the name of Moses' father-in-law, which actually means his abundance. As in the opening line of our Torah portion, it reads, Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard all that God had done for Moses and for Israel his people, how Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh had brought Israel out of Egypt. Exodus 18, verse 1. This week we will get a peek into the heavenlies. Let's first begin with a review of the Torah portion and the heavenly vision of Mount Sinai. After the battle with Amalek, at the end of last week's portion, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, joins the camp. Jethro also brings Moses' wife, Zipporah, and his two sons, Gershom, which means foreigner, and Eleazar, that means God is my help. Moses catches up Jethro with all the events of Egypt and the Exodus, and they rejoice and offer sacrifices to Adonai. Next, Jethro sees Moses sitting the next day, all day long, providing judgment for the people, sitting there all day, and all the people are sitting there all day, and realizes this is probably not a good, sustainable solution. So Jethro counsels him to appoint leaders from the people, men of good reputation, God-fearing, men of truth, men who despise bribery, to act as judges over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. In essence, setting up the hierarchy of court systems that most of our countries use today, with the most difficult cases coming all the way up to Moses, the Supreme Court. Jethro then departs back to his land, which isn't very far off. Israel then arrives in the wilderness of Sinai in the third month, or the third new moon, also known as the month of Sivan. The people encamped before the mountain, and Moses went up to Adonai, where he tells Moses, You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel. Exodus 19, 4 through 6. This is a charge that is still in effect for us today. We are to be his priests in the nations where we are currently scattered, to proclaim the king and the ways of the kingdom. Moses gathers the elders and relays the message, and the people respond, All that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh has spoken, we will do. Moses is told to consecrate, or means purify or sanctify, the people for 2 days, because Adonai will meet them on the third day. They are next warned to set boundaries all around the mountains so that no man or animal should approach uninvited. Anyone, man or beast, crossing this threshold is to be killed. On the morning of the third day, there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. So all the people in the camp trembled. Exodus 19:16. We also are on the morning of the third day, awaiting our bridegroom Yeshua. Because 1,000 years is a day to Adonai, and we are over 2,000 years since the first coming of Messiah. So we are actually on the morning of the third day. We too await that great shofar blast, heralding his glorious return. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. Exodus 19, verses 17 and 18. Holisa Alewine brought out the point that Moses led Israel out to meet Adonai at the foot of the mountain. Now the mountain is covered in smoke that produced a heavenly canopy, or a chuppah, which has a wedding motif, because you're married under a canopy. Moses, like the father of the bride, brings Israel down the aisle to meet her bridegroom. When we speak today about being the bride of Messiah Yeshua, this is where our minds should be drawn to. It's also interesting to note that since this scene of Mount Sinai with smoke and fire and how great it was is actually known by the sages as the day of revelation. So if you ask a Jewish brother about revelation, he's not going to go to the writing of John. What's going to pop up in his mind is this scene, the scene at Mount Sinai. This was also true of the Apostle John, who wrote the book of Revelation. He was a Jew, and he knew this very well. The revelation of Yeshua the Messiah, which God gave him to show to his servants the things that must soon take place. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant John, who bore witness to the word of God and to the testimony of Yeshua the Messiah, even to all that he saw. Revelation 1:1 and 2. John purposely uses the term revelation to draw the minds of his fellow Jewish believers to Mount Sinai, where Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh first revealed himself to Israel. Try to have this parallel in your mind the next time you're reading or you're studying through the book of Revelation. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh came down on Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain, and Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Exodus 19:20. Adonai tells Moses to go down and to warn the people so that they don't cross the set boundary and to bring Aaron back up with him. Next, Adonai will give the people the 10 Commandments or 10 words. We discussed before there's a slight difference on how they're counted between the Jewish sources and the Christian sources. So I'm going to briefly cover them from the Jewish source order. The first commandment is the belief that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is God, and that's the I am Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh who took you out of the land of Egypt line. The second is the prohibition of idolatry. The third is the prohibition of vain oaths or taking his name in vain. The fourth is the Sabbath or the Shabbat. The fifth is honoring parents. The sixth is prohibition against murder. The seventh is the prohibition against adultery. The eighth is the prohibition against stealing, which is actually seen as kidnapping. Because you can imagine like stealing a stick of gum from a store doesn't quite reach the high level of the 10 Commandments level, even though it's maybe minorly down there. But they really see this as being to the level of stealing human souls, just like adultery is that kind of level and murder is that kind of level. Number 9 is the prohibition against bearing false witness, because actually bearing false witness can have someone falsely put to death. And then number 10 is the prohibition against coveting. And they see this as a really unique commandment because it's really a thought crime if you think about it. Because how can you tell if someone's actually coveting or not? It's just something that's actually in your head. It's your motivation. And it goes back to what's written in 1 John 2:16, where it says that most everything, as Pastor Mark likes to say, comes from the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. So it's kind of the source of all this other stuff. And it is such a high level that it's actually included in the 10 Commandments. So by giving Israel the 10 Commandments, Adonai was giving them the ketubah, which is the marriage contract or their marriage vows. But not only was he presenting the ketubah, he was also presenting the bridegroom himself, Yeshua. Because John 1:1 says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." As Adonai is giving Israel the Word, he is presenting them the bridegroom, Yeshua, the Word made flesh. Now when all the people saw the thunder and the flashes of lightning, and the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled, and they stood afar off and said to Moses, "You speak to us, and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us, lest we die." Moses said to the people, "Do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin." The people stood afar off, while Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was. Exodus 20:18-21. Here we see the reaction of ordinary people in the presence of the awesome, holy revelation of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. The Apostle John was probably the apostle, if we were to think about it, that was closest to the Master, Yeshua, when he walked the earth. He seemed to be the beloved one. So let's look at his reaction to the revelation of Yeshua in the book of Revelation. Then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me. And on turning, I saw 7 golden lampstands, and in the midst of the lampstands, one like the Son of Man, clothed with a long robe and with a golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white, like white wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze, refined in a furnace, and his voice was like the roar of many waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars. From his mouth came a sharp 2-edged sword, and his face was like the sun shining in full strength. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. But he laid his right hand on me, saying, Fear not. I am the first and the last, and the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and Hades. Revelation 1:12-18. The people felt like they were going to die when Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh spoke to them from the mountain. Yeshua's closest disciple, John, also felt as dead at the heavenly revelation of Yeshua HaMashiach. In both instances, we are seeing into heavenly realms. The portion ends with instructions concerning altars. All the stones used for an altar should be natural stones, and you shall not wield your tool on it. In other words, you're not supposed to take a stone and shape it with a tool. You have to use it in its natural state. The stones can represent us, as he has uniquely designed each one of us, and not to be uniform bricks that are the works of men. As you come to him, a living stone, rejected by men, but in the sight of God, chosen and precious. You yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Yeshua the Messiah. 1 Peter 2, verses 4 and 5. This brings us to our Haftarah this week, Isaiah 6:1-7:6, and 9:5-6. We begin with the prophet Isaiah seeing into heavenly realms himself. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon the throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, 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 or Kadosh, 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 is Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the threshold shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. Isaiah 6, verses 1-4. Notice the parallels to Mount Sinai. Seraphim are known as fiery ones, and their presence is actually credited for the fire seen on Mount Sinai. There's also shaking and smoke that are also in the Sinai account. And I said, Woe is me, for I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth and said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin is atoned for. Verses 5-7. In the awesome presence of the Holy One, Isaiah is keenly aware of his fallen human state and just felt doomed. It's interesting that the seraph, who is actually made of fire, used tongs to bring the coal from the holy altar. The sages understand this was either one of 2 reasons. Either for the sake of Isaiah, and the tongs would allow them to administer the coal without having to touch Isaiah, which I would appreciate. If somebody made a fire come to me and wanted to touch me, want to stay a little bit far off. Or it was because the holiness and the potential extreme heat from the coal was so hot that even the fiery angel had to use tongs. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" Then I said, "Here I am, send me." Verse 8. Isaiah, like Moses, is willing to be the mediator between the Holy One and his people. And he said, "Go and say to this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy, and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed." Verse 9 and 10. Now, verse 10 in the Art Scroll translates the Hebrew, "This people is fattening its heart, hardening its ears, and sealing its eyes." It's not that Isaiah is being sent to make them dull. Then they're already doing this themselves by their unrighteousness. Their heart is dull or is insulated from the Holy Spirit. Their ears are heavy or hard against hearing the words of righteousness, and their eyes are blind to seeing the truth. If this wasn't the case, if they had an open heart and ears and eyes, then they would repent and they actually would be healed. Then I said, "How long, O Lord?" And he said, "Until cities lie waste without inhabitant, and houses without people, and the land is a desolate waste, and Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh removes people far away, and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land. And though a tenth remain in it, it will be burned again, like a terebinth or an oak, whose stump remains when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump." The word burned can also be translated as purged. That is compared to a tree, a terebinth, which is like an elm or an oak tree. Though the Hebrew, like in our ESV, can be translated that the tree had been felled and only a stump remains, felled can also be translated as cast, which can be seen as the whole tree being cast down, or it can be that the tree casting off all of its leaves, as a tree going into winter. Stump can also be translated as a pillar or a stalk of the tree, which can also be a picture of a tree devoid of its foliage. But the holy seed, or the holy offspring, is in the barren tree, so it can put on fresh leaves in springtime, a picture of the repopulation after the exile. In the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, the king of Israel, came up to Jerusalem to wage war against it, but could not yet mount an attack against it. When the house of David was told, "Syria is in league with Ephraim," the heart of Ahaz and the heart of his people shook, as the trees of the forest shake before the wind. Isaiah 7, verses 1 and 2. Jotham, or Jotham, was a righteous king that reigned for 16 years. But his son Ahaz was a wicked king that introduced an unheard-of degree of idolatry and plunged the southern kingdom into a new spiritual low. And Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh said to Isaiah, "Go out to meet Ahaz, you and Shear-Yashub, your son, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool, on the highway to the washer's field, and say to him, be careful, be quiet, do not fear, and do not let your heart be faint, because of these two smoldering stumps of firebrands, at the fierce anger of Rezin and Syria, and the son of Remaliah. Because Syria, with Ephraim, and the son of Remaliah has devised evil against you, saying, Let us go up against Judah, and terrify it, and let us conquer it for ourselves, and set up the son of Tabeel as king in the midst of it." Verses 3-6. The invading alliance wanted to topple Judah and install a ruler that they could control, the son of Tabeel, in place of the Davidic dynasty, something that the Holy One won't allow. even though Ahaz was a wicked king. The line of Davidic rule is in the hands of the Creator alone, and not in the hands of man. For every boot of the trampling warrior in battle tumult, every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. And his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Isaiah 9, 5 and 6. King Hezekiah, who is seen to be the most righteous of the kings, will reign after his wicked father Ahaz. Though we clearly see this is a messianic language and a messianic prophecy, the plain meaning of the text is actually referring to the defeat of Sennacherib during the reign of King Hezekiah. But Hezekiah is another forerunner and a prototype of the most righteous king, Yeshua. Let us eagerly await the awesome revelation of Yeshua, our Messiah. And may the Prince of Peace bring shalom to you wherever you are and in all your dwellings. I pray this teaching has been edifying. Let's lift up the name of the Holy One. With love, in Echad, Shalom.